You have exactly 14 days to demolish this illegal structure, or we'll do it for you," shouted a woman standing on my private jetty, waving a neon-pink violation notice like it was a declaration of war. The kicker? That jetty had more legal protection than her entire HOA charter. And the final twist? It was approved and protected by a Supreme Court ruling, one that I helped win. But Karen didn't know that yet. She just strutted down my dock like she owned it, unaware she had just picked a fight with the wrong man and the highest court in the land. It all started on a calm Saturday morning. I was out on my porch sipping coffee, watching the lake ripple in the golden sunrise like a lazy giant stretching its arms. Birds chirped. A heron flapped across the sky. It was my slice of heaven, my retreat from a chaotic engineering career that once took me across state lines solving water management issues. My home sat on 5 acres of land, with a jetty I had personally designed and built over 2 decades ago, part of a conservation and clean water pilot project that turned into a federal case. That jetty wasn't just wood and bolts, it was history. It was legal precedent. So when I saw a small parade of people marching down the gravel road toward my dock, I first thought it was a tour group or maybe high schoolers on a photography trip. But leading the charge was a woman in a sun visor, oversized sunglasses, and a matching jogging suit so blindingly white it looked like it was made of dental floss. Behind her were 2 men with clipboards, wearing HOA badges like they were FBI agents. I sighed. HOA Karen had arrived. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She simply stepped right past the private property sign and onto my dock like she was christening a cruise ship. I walked down to meet her, trying to remain calm. She extended her hand like I was a guest in her courtroom and launched into a rehearsed speech. "Sir, this dock is in violation of HOA bylaws 6.4, 8.2, and 9.1, relating to unauthorized waterfront construction, community water usage, and architectural harmony. You are hereby ordered to remove it or face legal action." I looked at her, blinked twice, then blinked again. "You do realize," I said slowly, "that this dock was built 10 years before your HOA was even formed?" Karen scoffed like I had just told her I believe the moon is made of cheese. "That doesn't matter. The bylaws are retroactive, and your so-called dock is an eyesore. It devalues the aesthetic of the lake." She actually said that while standing on the dock, staring across the water like she was Queen Neptune. One of the clipboard guys chimed in with a stiff voice. "We'll be issuing a notice of non-compliance and an invoice for the upcoming demolition service. The HOA has pre-contracted a removal crew." That was the moment I realized they weren't just bluffing. These people genuinely believed they could destroy my federally protected structure. I gave them a long, hard stare. Then I smiled. "Interesting," I said. "Because I have a document in my office, signed by the United States Supreme Court, stating otherwise." Karen's expression didn't budge. Either she thought I was bluffing or she truly believed her HOA titles held more weight than the highest court in the nation. "You have 14 days, she repeated. "After that, we bring the equipment." I watched them walk back to the road, heels clicking like a low-budget villain exit scene. As soon as they were gone, I locked the dock gate and walked straight to my home office. I pulled down the framed certificate that had sat untouched for years, still crisp under the glass. The 8-1 ruling from the Supreme Court had protected the water access infrastructure I helped develop under an environmental provision. That jetty was legally untouchable. But here's the thing, I hadn't needed to show that ruling in years. Not since the project was decommissioned and the environmental case closed. The jetty remained because of its structural integrity and contribution to lake flow and water safety, which the state agreed was beneficial to maintain. And I, being the stubborn old engineer I am, kept everything in order, documented, and filed. Just in case. Turns out, just in case had arrived. The next day, I noticed orange construction tape wrapped sloppily around the entrance of my jetty. A handmade sign was planted in the dirt that read, "Pending removal by HOA. Do not enter." I took a photo, then pulled the tape down and tossed it in the garbage. This was still my property, and they were already trespassing. A few hours later, 2 kids from the neighborhood biked past, skidding to a stop by the lake's edge. They looked nervous. One of them asked, "Mister, are they really going to tear it down?" I reassured them and told them the jetty wasn't going anywhere. The younger one, maybe 10 years old, said he caught his first fish on that dock. That nearly broke me. By Monday, a letter arrived in the mail with HOA letterhead and a $30,000 demolition invoice stapled to it. It read like a dystopian joke. Immediate action required to avoid enforcement proceedings. I called my lawyer. Then I called the local sheriff's office. Then, just for fun, I called a journalist friend who always loved a good David versus Goliath story. Especially when David had paperwork from the highest court in the land. That evening, as I grilled burgers on the back patio, I watched Karen from across the lake pacing with binoculars. She kept pointing at my dock, scribbling something down, and speaking into what looked like a walkie-talkie. I didn't know whether to laugh or lock the gates. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was an ego trip with a demolition permit. And so, just like that, my peaceful lakeside retirement turned into a legal, emotional, and hilarious war over 28 feet of wood, water, and iron bolt. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she wasn't challenging just some old guy with a dock. She was challenging history. She was challenging the U.S. Supreme Court. And I was more than ready to play that card. The war didn't stay confined to the dock. Karen had taken her absurd vendetta beyond the boundaries of logic and sanity, and now it was bleeding into my everyday life. It began with the petty things. Trash cans mysteriously kicked over in the morning, tire marks dangerously close to my hedges, and a steady stream of anonymous notes in my mailbox suggesting that I do the right thing before things get worse. Classic intimidation tactics, clumsy and amateurish. But I knew Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just going to defend my jetty. I was going to make sure she remembered this for the rest of her HOA tenure. Then came the surveillance. I noticed it while watering the tulips near the dock stairs. There was a brand new trail camera strapped to a pine tree, pointed suspiciously close to my walkway. It wasn't there last week. I followed its angle. Sure enough, it was aimed directly at the dock. The make was cheap, basic motion detection, and poorly hidden behind a few sticks. I smiled, walked inside, and grabbed my toolbox. If Karen wanted footage, I'd give her something to look at. I mounted a mirror on a tall post by the dock's edge and aimed it back toward the camera. When motion triggered her device, all it would catch now was a flash of sunlight and her own reflection. Of course, that didn't sit well with her. A few days later, I found both the mirror and the trail cam smashed on the ground. But whoever did it left footprints, clear as day, leading back to the HOA walking path. The passive-aggressive antics were escalating, and I had no intention of staying passive. I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, timestamp. I created a dedicated folder named Jettygate, and it was filling up fast. Things took a more serious turn when my canoe was cut loose. I had it tied to a side post, as usual, and one morning it was simply gone. I found it drifting, half-sunk, near the far end of the cove where the water curled into private marshland. Someone had clearly untied it, shoved it off, and walked away. That canoe had belonged to my late wife. It wasn't just a boat, it was a memory. I hauled it back, shaking with fury. When I called the sheriff's department again, the deputy who came out told me the situation was getting out of hand, and they'd be making an official report this time. He hinted that the HOA had been involved in similar disputes in the past, but rarely with someone this well prepared. Karen wasn't done. No, she was just getting warmed up. A week later, a flatbed truck pulled up at 7:30 a.m., and 3 men hopped out with reflective vests and hard hats. One of them knocked on my door while the others walked toward the dock with measuring tape and spray paint. The man at my doorstep introduced himself as Jake from Lakeside Removals, and said they were here to begin the first stage of dismantling the structure. He waved a paper with a signature at me. I didn't even glance at it. "I hope you haven't started," I said calmly, stepping outside with a copy of my Supreme Court certificate. "Because if you touch a single bolt of that dock, I'll have you arrested for tampering with federally protected infrastructure. And this," I said, tapping the document, "will hold up a lot longer than that fake work order signed by a woman who thinks HOA president means she's the Queen of England." Jake hesitated. His crew paused at the dock's edge. "You serious?" he asked. "Dead serious," I said. "And to make things easier, I've already called the sheriff. You'll want to stick around to explain why your contract is illegal." They left within 10 minutes, muttering something about not being paid enough for this kind of mess. I took video of their truck and license plate and added it to my growing Jettygate archive. 10 minutes after they left, Karen arrived, arms flailing, mouth in overdrive. "You scared them off," she screeched. "They had the right to be here." "No, Karen," I said, louder than usual. "They didn't. And unless you'd like your entire HOA to face a federal lawsuit, I'd recommend you stop sending unlicensed demolition crews to my property." That caught her off guard. Her face twitched like a busted fax machine trying to send a signal. "This isn't over," she hissed, before stomping off in a cloud of perfume and rage. I knew I needed reinforcements. That night, I reached out to my old friend Sam, a journalist who worked for a regional outlet and loved a good underdog story. When I explained the situation, he practically begged to do a piece. The angle was irresistible. Supreme Court-approved Jetty, HOA overreach, elderly homeowner targeted by entitled leadership. It was the perfect storm of absurdity and legal drama. We scheduled an interview for the next day. While prepping for the interview, I dug deep into my archives. I found old photos of the original construction process, newspaper clippings about the conservation effort, and even a signed thank you letter from the state's Department of Environmental Quality. All of it went into a binder I titled HOA Reality Check. I figured I'd be needing it soon enough. Sam arrived with a small camera crew and a clipboard of questions. We filmed near the dock, where the sun hit the water just right. I explained the legal case, the HOA harassment, and the attempted sabotage. Sam asked the perfect closing question: "Why fight so hard to protect a dock?" I smiled. "Because it's not just a dock. It's a line in the sand. It's proof that one person, with the truth and the law on their side, can stand up to people who think power gives them permission." He nodded, clearly satisfied. "That's gold." Later that week, Sam called me. "The piece goes live Friday morning. We're giving it a punchy title: Retired Engineers Dock vs. HOA Tyranny and the Supreme Court's Surprise Roll." I laughed. "You know that's going to drive Karen absolutely insane, right?" "That's the plan," he said. But Karen wasn't waiting for the media to strike. Just as the article went live, she prepared her next move. I received another HOA letter, this time marked urgent, immediate response required. It was a formal declaration that I was being fined $500 per day for noncompliance. Attached was a blurry photo of my jetty, now labeled with red arrows and circles. They were accusing me of harboring unauthorized marine equipment, which apparently meant my fishing pole rack. I sat down, read it twice, and then laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. This wasn't just petty anymore, it was theatrical. And I was just getting started. I scanned the new letter, filed it into the Jettygate folder, and made a fresh cup of coffee. If Karen wanted to play hardball, she'd better bring a helmet. Because the next move would be mine, and it would be nuclear. By the time Friday rolled around, the article had done more damage to Karen's ego than I ever could have predicted. Sam's piece spread faster than wildfire at a fireworks factory. It didn't just go viral locally, it exploded across HOA watchdog groups, boomer Facebook circles, and even made it onto a Reddit thread titled Top 10 Petty HOA Nightmares. The headline alone was enough to stir the pot. Engineers Supreme Court protected dock targeted by HOA tyrant. You won't believe what she did next. Within 24 hours, I had strangers emailing me words of encouragement, lakefront homeowners asking for legal advice, and one man offering to build me a bronze statue of the dock. No joke, he sent a sketch. I expected Karen to panic. What I didn't expect was her to go completely off the rails. That evening, just after sunset, I heard voices outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw a group of HOA board members gathered on the common path, armed with flashlights, clipboards, and something that looked like a measuring wheel. Karen stood in the middle, pointing at my dock like General Patton before a beach invasion. I stepped out with a flashlight of my own and cleared my throat loud enough to make them jump. "Doing a midnight raid now, are we?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Karen spun around and held up a piece of paper like it was a sacred scroll. "We're conducting an official HOA inspection. You're obstructing a legal process." "Wrong again," I replied. "You're on my property. At night. With no prior notice and no legal authority. That's called trespassing. And it's being recorded." I gestured to the camera I had recently installed, which blinked red as it captured every ridiculous second of their little field trip. Her expression twisted into a mix of rage and panic. "This isn't over," she hissed again, her favorite phrase, before ordering her troops to retreat like wet cats. But it didn't end there. Not even close. The next morning, a formal letter was posted to the community bulletin board outside the HOA clubhouse. It was addressed to all residents and titled Community Alert, Unauthorized Propaganda Regarding Lakefront Structure. It accused me of spreading misinformation, damaging the community's image, and warned residents not to participate in any smear campaign against the HOA board. It read like a paranoid manifesto. My favorite line: "The individual in question is not above the laws of harmony and architectural peace." Naturally, someone took a picture of the letter and posted it to Reddit. That post reached the front page within hours. The comments were merciless. One user wrote, "HOA Karen's trying to declare war on the Supreme Court. Somebody get her a copy of the Constitution and a juice box." Another user offered to send a miniature gavel to hang on my dock, as a symbol of her impending legal defeat. It was petty, chaotic, and wildly entertaining. But beneath the laughter, I knew I needed to hit back harder, not with memes but with strategy. That Monday, I scheduled an appointment with Preston, my lawyer. Preston was sharp, sarcastic, and had the face of someone who only smiled after winning cases. He reviewed everything I'd collected: the HOA letters, demolition threats, photos of vandalism, and most importantly, the original Supreme Court judgment. As he flipped through the documents, his grin widened. "This isn't just overreach," he said. "This is a case study in stupidity. They violated state property codes, trespassed, threatened illegal demolition, and ignored a federal ruling. Karen may think she's a general, but she just marched her troops into a minefield." He prepared a cease and desist letter so thorough it could have doubled as a mini-thesis. It cited federal law, state environmental rulings, property statutes, and included a certified copy of the Supreme Court decision. But he didn't stop there. He also sent a formal complaint to the Department of Natural Resources, the State Attorney General, and the county's Zoning and Property Review Board. Karen had kicked a hornet's nest wearing flip-flop. I hand-delivered the letter to the HOA clubhouse. Karen wasn't there, but her second-in-command, a man named Glenn who once threatened to fine me for inadequate mulch depth, was seated behind a folding table. When he opened the envelope and saw the legal header, he paled like he'd seen a ghost. I simply nodded and walked out without saying a word. 2 days later, the HOA meeting turned into a complete meltdown. I wasn't allowed to attend, of course. Karen had banned me from all public HOA forums due to ongoing legal conflict. But that didn't matter. A sympathetic neighbor, Sandy, slipped a tiny lapel mic into her pocket and recorded the entire debacle. She sent me the audio later that night. The meeting began with Karen trying to downplay the article, claiming it was fake news manipulated by enemies of the board. She dismissed my Supreme Court ruling as probably photoshopped, and tried to push a vote to hire a new demolition team with no fear of legal scare tactics. But this time, the board wasn't with her. One by one, the members began to question her judgment, her tactics, and the increasing number of angry calls they were getting from residents. Glenn even asked if she had bothered to verify whether the jetty truly was federally protected. Her answer? He's just bluffing. Probably printed it off Google. That was the turning point. The board refused to vote on her new proposal. One member demanded an independent review of the entire situation. Another suggested Karen step back until legal clarity is established. Karen flipped, yelling about disloyalty, betrayal, and something about HOA bylaws being stronger than federal oversight. The audio ends with her slamming a chair against the wall and storming out. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No surveillance, no tape, no new threat. The lake was calm. The dock glistened in the morning light like nothing had happened. But it wasn't over yet. That afternoon, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a man in a navy blue polo holding a clipboard. "Good afternoon. I'm here from the Department of Natural Resources. We received a report about unauthorized actions against a federally registered structure. Do you mind if I take a look?" I smiled. "Be my guest." He walked the length of the jetty, examining everything with practiced eyes. I showed him the Supreme Court documentation, environmental approvals, and recent letters from the HOA. After reviewing it all, he let out a low whistle. "They've really stepped in it," he muttered. "Don't worry. We're opening a formal inquiry. No one touches this dock without consequences." As he walked back to his vehicle, I couldn't help but feel the tide shifting. Karen's empire wasn't just cracking, it was starting to sink. And I wasn't done yet. The next phase wasn't just about defense. It was time to go on the offensive. Because when someone tries to erase your history, your property, and your peace, the best revenge isn't just proving them wrong, it's doing it publicly, legally, and with absolute finality. Karen disappeared for a few days after her boardroom blow-up. It was the calm before the storm, but it wasn't my storm to weather anymore. By then, the Department of Natural Resources had begun its investigation, and the first thing they did was post a formal notice on the Community Bulletin Board, an official cease-action advisory warning that any interference with the jetty structure may result in civil and federal penalties. It was printed on high-contrast legal stationery and had a big red seal stamped across the bottom. Residents stopped by in twos and threes, reading it, whispering, and walking away with widened eyes. For many of them, this was the first real sign that the HOA had gone too far, and that Karen might not be the invincible queen bee she pretended to be. But Karen wasn't going to go quietly. The calm only lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, I woke to the sound of a car horn blaring in front of my property. When I opened the blinds, I saw her standing beside her convertible, shouting into a phone and pointing at the jetty. She looked unhinged. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases like false authority, propaganda smear, and nobody tells me what to do on my lake. The woman had finally snapped. She wasn't just ignoring the Supreme Court ruling, she was now directly challenging state and federal oversight like a suburban revolutionary. Later that same day, she delivered one final act of desperation. A so-called marine safety inspector came to my door, wearing a beige uniform and sunglasses. His badge looked fake. His clipboard was blank. He introduced himself as Officer Trent and claimed he was there to re-evaluate the jetty for compliance issues. But I recognized him almost immediately. It was Karen's nephew, Tim, a 20-something idiot who once dressed up as a pirate at a Halloween block party and tried to fight a mailbox. I didn't let on at first. I invited him to walk down the dock with me, asking questions as he scribbled made-up notes. When we reached the end, I said casually, "So, Tim, how much is your aunt paying you for this little costume party?" He froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on. You're wearing the same boots you wore when you fell into the lake last 4th of July. You even smell like that same discount rum. Don't insult my intelligence." He took off the sunglasses slowly, looked around, then sighed. "I was just doing her a favor. She said if I didn't help, she'd cut me off from the family business." I nodded. "Well, you might want to find a different family to invest in. Because this one's about to implode." I escorted him off my property without another word, made sure my cameras had recorded everything, and then sent the footage directly to my lawyer and the Department of Natural Resources. Within 24 hours, an official complaint was filed against the HOA for impersonating a government official, falsifying enforcement documents, and attempting to tamper with federally protected property. Preston, my attorney, told me this was now beyond civil law. It was a federal issue. Karen wasn't just in trouble. She was in a whole new arena of consequences. By the following week, the board was in full panic mode. An emergency HOA meeting was called and held at the clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course, but again, Sandy attended with a mic hidden in her purse and sent me the recording that evening. The atmosphere was different this time, tense, defensive, and almost mutinous. Karen walked in acting like nothing had changed, started the meeting by claiming she had been vindicated by her own internal investigation, and then tried to reintroduce a motion to enforce retroactive compliance on all waterfront structures, including mine. What she didn't anticipate was the board finally standing up to her. Glenn was the first to speak. "Karen, we have 3 legal complaints filed against us this week. One of them is from the Department of Natural Resources. We're in way over our heads." Another board member, Rita, chimed in. "You told us the dock was illegal. You told us there was no federal oversight. You said he was bluffing. And now we're all liable." Karen fired back, her voice rising like a boiling kettle. "He's manipulating the system. You think that dock matters more than our community's vision? If we give in now, every resident will think they can ignore the rules." There was a long pause before someone replied, "Maybe they should, if the rules are based on lies." That was the breaking point. The board voted, publicly and on record, to strip Karen of her position as president. They also voted to freeze all HOA enforcement related to the lake until further notice, pending independent legal review. Karen screamed. I don't mean she yelled. I mean full-throated, red-faced screaming about betrayal, injustice, and how they were all just jealous. She stormed out, knocking over a stack of folding chairs, and reportedly peeled off in her convertible so fast she blew through a stop sign at the main entrance. That same night, a new notice appeared on the community board. It read, "Karen Thompson has been removed from HOA leadership. Effective immediately, all pending enforcement actions under her authority are suspended." My phone buzzed nonstop with texts and calls from neighbors who had once kept their distance but were now laughing, celebrating, and asking if I was going to throw a party. One even offered to bring a bounce house for the kids. It was surreal. Just a few weeks ago, I'd been quietly fishing off my dock. Now I was the accidental hero of the entire neighborhood. The following day, I received a formal letter from the Department of Natural Resources. They had completed their investigation. The conclusion was clear. The jetty had not only been legally constructed and federally protected, it was considered a point of historical environmental interest. In fact, they offered to place an official marker at the base of the structure, recognizing it as part of the State Environmental Engineering Legacy Program. It would be protected from any future interference unless removed by direct federal authority. I framed that letter too. And then I did something Karen never would have expected. I invited the entire neighborhood to a lakeside cookout. I set up tables, coolers, chairs, even a karaoke machine. People brought food, drinks, and stories of their own HOA nightmares. We called it Jetty Day. Kids jumped off the dock into the water, adults toasted with beer and lemonade, and for the first time in a long time, the community felt united. Even Glenn showed up. He shook my hand, looked at the jetty, and said, "You were right. We got lost in the rules and forgot about the people." I nodded. "Happens more often than you'd think." As the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the lake with streaks of gold, I sat at the edge of the jetty with my feet in the water and thought about how wild things had become. All over a few planks of wood, a couple bolts, and one stubborn HOA dictator who believed her clipboard had more power than the Constitution. She didn't just lose a battle, she started a movement. And now the dock wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who ever stood their ground against entitled tyranny. But I wasn't finished just yet. There was one final chapter left to write. One more surprise to give the community. Because once the dust settled, I had something special in store that would seal this saga forever. And Karen? She was about to see her greatest humiliation turned into local legend. Jetty Day became more than a party, it became a declaration. People who once avoided HOA meetings out of fear or boredom were now asking to see the Supreme Court certificate and the environmental approvals like it was some kind of national treasure. And in a way it was. The dock wasn't just wood and water anymore, it had become a symbol of how a single person standing up with facts, grit, and a good sense of humor could take down a self-important regime. But I still had one more card to play. One more twist Karen wouldn't see coming. Because the best revenge isn't just winning, it's turning the win into legacy. About a week after Jetty Day, I filed a request with the county to rename the path leading from the main road to the lake. It was an unmarked trail for years, used mostly by dog walkers and the occasional kid with a fishing rod. I submitted a petition with signatures from over 70% of the neighborhood, and the proposed name? Jetty Justice Way. When the county clerk read the reasoning and saw the news articles, she laughed and stamped it approved on the spot. Within 2 weeks, a brand new street sign went up, green with white lettering, standing tall right at the community entrance. Karen's house was now officially located off Jetty Justice Way. I couldn't have scripted it better if I tried. Karen, of course, went ballistic. She posted on the HOA forum ranting that it was a disgraceful misuse of government resources and that she would personally see it reversed. But the vote had been legal, the paperwork flawless, and the community overwhelmingly behind it. She couldn't do anything except fume every time she backed out of her driveway and saw that beautiful sign. Some residents claimed they saw her trying to cover it with a trash bag at night, but the bag kept getting mysteriously removed before sunrise. And I definitely didn't install a discreet solar spotlight aimed at the sign to make it glow at night. Definitely not. Meanwhile, the new HOA leadership, now under Trish, who actually listened, smiled, and brought cookies to meetings, was working on revising several outdated rules. They removed the retroactive enforcement clause, limited the president's authority over private property disputes, and introduced a public complaint resolution process with a third-party mediator. It wasn't perfect, but it was a far cry from the dictatorship Karen had been running. Residents actually started attending meetings again. Even Glenn, once her loyal enforcer, turned into an advocate for moderation. He said something during a meeting that stuck with me. "We're not here to control the neighborhood, we're here to help it thrive." Then came the day I received an invitation to speak at the State Environmental Conference. Turns out, the DNR's involvement in the HOA debacle had drawn attention from folks in other counties who had dealt with similar overreach. They wanted me to tell the story, from the jetty's origin all the way to the ridiculous attempt to have it removed. I showed up in jeans and a fishing hat and ended up speaking in front of over 200 people, including city planners, legal experts, and policy makers. When I explained how a rogue HOA tried to demolish a federally protected dock, the entire room burst out laughing. But when I showed them the photo of the Supreme Court certificate next to the $30,000 demolition invoice, they got quiet. That silence turned into applause. Not for me, but for the fact that even after decades of red tape and local bureaucracy, the system had done what it was meant to: protect the right thing. After the talk, a young woman approached me. She introduced herself as a student working on her thesis about property rights and local governance. She asked if she could feature the Jetty in her research, and if she could visit to take pictures and interview residents. I said yes. A week later, she was sitting on the dock with a notebook, talking to kids about fishing and to neighbors about how things had changed. I realized then this story wasn't just about a legal battle or a power-hungry Karen. It was about how communities wake up when someone refuses to roll over. I decided to make it permanent. One afternoon, with the help of a few neighbors, I installed a polished cedar plaque on the base of the dock. It read, "This jetty was built in service of clean water, defended in court, and preserved by community. Protected by law. Remembered by all." Below that was the date of the Supreme Court decision, and the official number of the ruling. People stopped to read it. Kids ran their fingers over the engraving. Even tourists from nearby towns started coming by after hearing about it online. The dock had become more than a structure. It was a story, one they could stand on. A few days later, I saw Karen again. She was walking alone along the lake path, her usual scowl softer than usual, her posture not quite as rigid. She stopped near the dock and just stared. I watched from the porch. After a minute, she turned and slowly walked up to my gate. She didn't buzz the intercom. She just waited. I opened the door. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just said, "I didn't know what you were fighting for until I lost everything trying to stop you." I looked at her, not with anger, but with the kind of tired calm that comes from having climbed a mountain you never asked to climb. I simply said, "That's the thing about power, it blinds you to what actually matters. But it's never too late to look." She nodded and walked away. No storming, no threats, no parting insults. Just silence. It was the closest thing to peace I think I'd ever get from her. The following spring, the dock hosted its second Jetty Day. More people came this time. Local vendors offered food, kids organized games, and someone brought a mini stage where a neighbor played acoustic guitar. Near sunset, Trish took the mic and surprised me with a speech. She announced that the HOA had officially recognized the Jetty as a historic community landmark and introduced me as its honorary steward. I didn't say much in response, just thanked everyone and asked if someone could bring me another slice of pecan pie. Now, every morning, I sit at the edge of that jetty with a cup of coffee and watch the mist lift off the lake. The chaos is gone. The signs are still there. The plaque gleams. And every once in a while, a passerby asks about the dock. I tell them the story. I keep it light, make them laugh with the pirate nephew bit or the demolished trail cam, but I always end the same way. It wasn't about winning against the HOA. It was about reminding everyone that the truth, once anchored, doesn't move. Even when the storms roll in. And the dock? It's still here. Still strong. Still standing. Just like me.